Now we're going to be looking at volumetric materials. I'm going to start out just by using a sphere, which should work quite well for what it is that we're going to be creating. And then we can convert this to other types of objects to see the sort of shapes that we get. So let's double click on our preview to open up our advanced material editor, and we're going to change our current default surface from a simple material to a volumetric material. And now if we take a look in our render, we can see that volumetric material showing up. And we have a couple of different options for setting what our volumetric material is going to look like and how it behaves. We can first notice that we have a density production. This allows us to use the function editor to create a variety of nodes to control exactly what the shape of our volumetric is going to be. To the right of that, we have our volumetric settings. Here we can adjust the overall density. You can see as I increase our density, we have our overall sphere being more filled with that material. We can adjust the fuzziness, so the outer edges, and how much that's going to come in and remove from our surface. Underneath that is our quality boost. And we can raise that to a little bit of a higher amount to start to remove that grain that we can see. Now instead of using fuzziness, we can also use distance field. Once we select that, our fuzziness option will disappear, and now we have the ability to adjust from 0 to 100% of how much our object and material is showing. At 50%, or around 50%, we can only see 50% of our surface. And we can decrease that to see a little bit more. And let's go ahead and just change the color. So we're going to edit our color. We could select something that's orange, and we can see that sort of orange glow showing up. And let's move over to our Lighting and Effects tab, where we have a couple of different options. We can adjust the origin of our material and the velocity if we'd like to animate it, along with our global transformations as we had with our simple and mixed materials, where we can adjust the turbulence, rotation, and cycling. Within our lighting model, we have a couple of different options: uniform, shaded, additive, volume shaded, and hypertexture. Now, in order to really see these, we're going to need some sort of function on our density production. So let's right mouse click and go to Edit Function, and for density, we're going to make sure we have this selected, and we're going to click on a fractal node. And this will load in just a simple fractal, and I'm going to change our wavelength to 0.2 on all of our axes, and we can start to see that show up within the output observer. I can increase our roughness and a little bit of our gain, and click OK. Now let's take a look at our preview. We can start to see the shape, but overall the color is the same. Through the shadow, if we take a look at the ground, we can see a little bit better of the overall shape. But with this type of volumetric, we're really going to have one constant color. So if we move over to the Lighting and Effects section, we can change this from uniform to shaded. And now with shaded, we can start to see some of our definition take place. But overall, this is still basically based on our sphere, and we're not seeing too much of our actual function that we have. We can change this to additive, and now we're going to see no shadow at all, and we have a very bright surface. But there's really not a whole lot we can adjust at this setting. Now we can move on to one of the more powerful settings, which is volume shaded. And now if we take a look with our volume shaded mode, we can see we have accurate shadows that are completely dependent on our density production, and we have a very realistic looking sort of cloud. We can create a variety of things this way. We can create smoke, we can create fire, we can create explosions, and there's just a lot we can do with it. And once we've selected our volume shaded mode, you can also see we have a new tab, Volumetric Color. This allows us to adjust based on a gradient and any other function we'd like to control the color of this volumetric material. So let's just load in a color map for this, and I'm going to load in our sandstone under rocks and grass, which is a nice orange to yellow And we can take a look at that. But really, we're only seeing our overall color because of the way our color production is currently not connected to any sort of function. So we're going to right mouse click, go to Edit Function to open up our function editor. And what we're going to select is our constant node on the top, and we can replace that with a fractal. And now we can control our gradient, as we did with our other colors, entirely with this fractal or anything else we'd like to include with it. We could use multiple color combiners, and we can also use our filters and math nodes to adjust however we want. So I'm going to change our wavelength, and we'll have this sort of match the actual material and the function for our production of the density. And we can increase our roughness and a little bit of our gain. Now, if I wanted, I could also change this to a different noise setting, or what I could also do is copy our density production from our color and density and paste that into our color production for a volumetric color. Now we're going to have to change a few things if we do that, but overall, then we'll be able to match up to our settings, so our colors and everything will kind of blend nicely. And we can see right now we have a really neat looking sort of cloud, nice volumetric material, where we can see all of the different colors showing up and our different levels of density. So I'm going to turn down our field depth just a little so we can see more of our material. But overall, it's still a very round shape. So what we want to do is just adjust the function scale a little. Let's bring our function scale down to 0.5, and we can take a look and see how our material is. We can still see that there's a lot of areas that are blending together. I'm going to increase our field depth to sort of remove those round areas, and now we can start to see a little more shape in our actual cloud. If I wanted to, I could also go into our function for our density, and we could increase our gain. And now if we take a look, we can see a lot more defined areas. And the more we move within our field depth, the more we can remove from the edges, and we can start to see a lot more shapes of an object. Now I'm going to switch this to Object Standard and click OK. And now what I want to do is just stretch out our sphere. So we're going to select the scale option on the Z-axis and just scale this up. And the reason we set this to a standard and not leaving it at a parametric is because we didn't want to stretch out the current surface. We'd like to show more of our volumetric surface within this material. So we can take a look and we can see the overall setting, and we've got a pretty neat looking volumetric material here. If we go to our volumetric color, we can also reduce that as well to 0.5, and that's going to match up a lot better with our current density production. Now at any time we could also load in a different color map. We could do something green, so we can select fields under rock and grass, and now we see a very green looking material and sort of a greenish cloud. We could also load in one of our sunset skies. We could select red. We take a look. We've got a really neat looking surface now. We take a look at our orange. And we can see we've got a really neat effect there. We can go through some of the other options. Let's load in our canyon. And now we can see we have a lot of different colors all swirling around within this volumetric material. We do something a little bit smaller, just our layers. And now we can see all of that color map being shown up in there. And of course we can edit this function however we want to affect this. And we could also just stick with the current normal color if we wanted to. And since we're using the volume shaded mode, we're going to be able to see those nice shadows. So I'm going to reset this color map, which is just going to give us a black. And this is a really cool way to make dark smoke. We can edit this color map and I'm just going to create a new key point at position -1, stick with the key color of black. Now we're going to select our last key point and just raise it up so it's a little bit more of a gray. And now we can see a little more definition in our actual smoke, and it looks like a really nice thick amount of black smoke. So we can create a variety of different effects this way, and we can also animate this by using either the function editor or our velocity of material origin. If we go back to our lighting and effects tab, we can see that we have a diffuse option, an ambient, and a luminous option. If we increase our density, or our diffusion, we can see a little bit more overall brightness in our current material. Ambient, once we increase that, we're also going to see a little more brightness in the ambient areas, in the areas that are not directly affected by light, or whatever light we currently have in the scene. And our luminous setting will allow us to make this sort of a faked brightness. Now, since we have such a dark color, we really can't see this luminous setting. So I'm going to change our volumetric color and just load in a color map. Let's select our iceberg altitude map, click OK. Now we'll be able to see the blue and white. Go to our lighting effects. If we adjust our luminous, turn that down, we start to see more definition. Turn down our ambient, and now we can see a much more defined area. And now if we turn our luminous back up and just focus on that overall luminosity, we can get a nice bright material. And turn that down all the way. You could also turn down your diffusion all the way, and that will give you an entirely black surface. Increase it just a little, and we start to work towards that volumetric color that we have set. And now you're going to notice a lot of grain unless you have your quality boost turned up higher. But the higher you go, the longer it's going to take to render, and in your volume shaded mode, it's going to take even longer to render, because this one can take a lot longer than some of the other volumetric materials, just because it is directly related to a function, and depending on the complexity of your function, it could take a lot longer to render. But we can see a much more smooth surface now that we have a quality boost of 2.9, and overall it looks really good. And we'll just go ahead and do a quick render of that, set that to final, render to screen, and I'm just going to do 640 by 480. We can see the overall quality of this render turned out quite well. And if we wanted to increase maybe some of the crispness around more of the defined edges, what we can do is increase the roughness or the gain within our density production to sort of change that. But we can take a look at our density, and if we decrease that, we just notice a very slight amount of that material showing up. And it also reflects upon the shadow that we're seeing as well. So it's a very cool option that we have here. There's really a lot we can do with these volumetric materials. And I want to take a look at one of the other lighting models, and that is our Hypertexture option. And with Hypertexture, we can create entirely 3D and volumetric materials just based on these functions. So you could really create some very interesting shapes and objects just by adjusting your density production to a specific way. And if we go to Edit Function, let's go ahead and just change this to get a look at what a different pattern would look like. If we change that to crystals, we can see that start to show up. And in this specific case, it's really going to be a lot of little bits here and there. So let's go ahead and change that. We can go to Math Patterns, we can select Onion, and we can see that sort of showing up. but not all of these nodes are going to work really well for volumetrics. But we could do step, and now we can see that showing up, which is a pretty neat looking material. We could do the Verona, and in this case what we're actually seeing is sort of an inverted look for our terrain, and that's mainly because our gain and roughness are so high. But if I decrease mainly our gain, we can take a look and create a different type of surface. And the Verona actually takes a little bit longer to render than some of the other nodes, but we can see the immediate effect. We've got a really neat looking surface here without using our displacement mapping for bumps. And we can actually create an entirely custom surface just based off of this. And if you take a look at our Hypertexture material, this also appears sort of as an object would, so we can actually load in materials specifically for this. We can go to material layers, and I'm just going to select our complex sedimentary rock and click OK. So now we have a volumetric material with a standard material applied directly to it. So let's take a look at some of our other settings just by changing basically the shape of our object. So I'm going to replace this and just use fit object, and first replace this with a torus. So now we can see the shape of our torus showing up, and I'm just going to stretch that back on our Z, and we can create a nice overall shape, and we get a very nice rocky surface on that. And because of that, what we can also do is use metablob objects to kind of form out certain sorts of rock formations and really anything you can think of where you could use a hypertexture with it. But let's go back and change this to our volume shaded mode. I'm also going to decrease our quality boost so we're getting a little bit of a faster render, although it will look a little more grainy. But now we can see with our torus it's really not showing up too much, so we'll decrease our field depth so we can see a little bit more, increase our density, and now we can start to see that cloud sort of come together. And we're going to edit our function and change this to a Perlin noise gradient. And I'm going to increase our roughness and just a little bit of our gain and click OK. And we can take a look at that material. You can see that showing up quite nicely. Increase our diffusion. And there's just one last thing I want to take a look at, and that is our flare setting. And this works basically the same as our other flare setting, but what I want to do is just convert this back to a sphere, and now we can see our overall object, which is pretty neat looking actually. And what we want to do is just position our sun behind that. So now our sun is sort of shining through this material. Go back to our advanced material editor, and now we can adjust the intensity and the span of that overall effect caused by the sun. So if I increase our intensity, we see a little bit of brightness change, but mainly our span, you can see how much that fully covers our object. We could reduce those just a little to make that effect not so prominent. And also keep in mind that the span settings will actually be affected even if the light isn't directly behind this object, just because it is volumetric. But if you take a look at the current object that we have, it's actually kind of neat looking, where we have sort of a split surface. And if you take a look, very thick clouds are on the outside. And that could be largely part of our density production being so a little bit smaller, so we can raise this up to 2, render that, and we notice a little bit of a less shape. So maybe we bring that down to 0.1, even smaller, increase our field depth, and overall, because of the type of surface we currently have, we're getting sort of a very fuzzy looking ball. So you can change your density production to a different node to achieve basically whatever effect you're looking for, but you can replicate fur in this fashion. If you wanted to use a metablob object and kind of make it furry, you could use these volumetric materials for that. You could also load in objects from other programs and then apply these volumetric materials and really just get some neat looking effects out of it, because there's a lot we can do. And let's just load in a different color map right now. We do our rocks and grass. We'll select our red, brown, yellow, click OK, and now we can see that showing up. So the creation of these volumetrics are very similar to other programs that have volumetrics. If you take Lightwave, for instance, it has hypervoxels, and these are actually extremely similar to the way hypervoxels are created, and the overall appearance is actually about the same. So we can achieve some really neat looking effects. And really it's just a matter of how many settings you have for your function and what you have set to it.